organization. Dr. Narishkin has a PhD in adult education and 30 plus years teaching, consulting, managing, and research in this area. She works with families, educational, religious, and business organizations and helps them navigate productive conversations about new and challenging topics that arise, especially in our society and in our environments. Amy works with CEOs, management teams, and others who want to effectively implement the tools of cultural intelligence, collaboration, and innovation for growth in their organization. She is a certified administrator for the Intercultural Developmental Inventory, which I've taken, and it's very interesting. You learn a lot about yourself by taking it. And then
not all bad.
And it's even more interesting when Amy sits down with you and goes over it, because it's not always what you think.
No blame, no shame, just information.
That's right. As a cross-cultural talk leader and a successful entrepreneur, she coaches individuals and organizational teams, creating culturally intelligent places to work and interact. And she has a great blog at empoweringpartners.com. Full disclosure, Amy has been working with NCJW, and she's worked with NCJW board, staff, and other NCJW leaders to create a more culturally intelligent place to work and participate. And we loved our experiences. So we wanted to spread the good word and message, and that is why we invited her to this Lunch and Learn. So I am going to stop and let Amy do just that.
I'm just wondering if you could be the person that always introduces to me. I love your authenticity and your fun. Thank you. But I said a little bit ago, thank you for letting me eat.
I have to go upstairs. Can I have
in
that?
front of you. Somebody needs to mute.
Thank you.
Just finished a 2-hour workshop and I had to eat something. So thank you for letting me eat in front of you. And what I'm going to share with you today, and tell me, do I have until 1 o'clock? Is that right, Felice? I can't hear you. You're muted.
So about 12:45, and then we want to leave time for Q&A.
Okay. All right. So what we'll do is I'm actually going to blend kind of the conversation in with and really do a workshop. So it won't be a clear delineation. I'm not going to yammer at you guys. I want you to warm up your fingers and get your chat box open, and we're gonna be talking kind of the whole time. I'm going to start, for those of you that were part of the original workshop series last summer, I've got to just get some baseline vocabulary out there. And then I'll share something that feels a little fresh and new too. Here is, thank you for making me your co-host, Jen. Can you give me a thumbs up? Do you see the slide? Okay, awesome, thank you. So how to advocate productively with this thing called cultural intelligence. Let's get this word defined. Oh my goodness, we're using it. This is what we're going to do with our time. I'm going to give you a warm-up question. And let me see. Before I just want to give the introverts, what keeps people from taking action on behalf of others? For the introverts in the room, that's going to be the warm-up question that I'm going to ask in just a minute. So here's our agenda. There's the warm-up question. I'm going to share a little story with you. We're going to develop some common vocabulary, learn what blocks people from connecting with one another, discover what you can do about it, and then we're going to do a wrap up with one word, kind of how you're feeling, because it matters to me. And Felice, you'll be really helpful to me if you write down, if somebody says, this is what I'm lousy at. So my strategist, my business strategist is a marketing person. And she says, Amy, if somebody says something really cool that we could use as a quote, would you please share it with me? And I'm like, but I'm teaching. So Felice, if somebody says something really cool, could you write it down for me and email it to me? And I might even say, Felice, that was really cool. So can you write that down?
You're just keeping me on my toes.
Okay, all right. Because people have this incredible insight, and I just want to capture some of it. I'm purposely not recording because I don't want people to feel awkward about sharing. I want people to feel like they can jump in. So in your chat box, could you write what keeps people from taking action on behalf of others? There are no wrong answers. You just kind of jump in. Louise says shyness. Yes. Jen says yes. Time. Definitely an issue. Uncertainty. Wait, who said uncertainty? Mary said uncertainty. Thank you. Michelle said being afraid of getting involved in someone else's painful experience. Oh, definitely. Thank you, Michelle. That would hold us back. Fear of criticism. Yes. You even alluded to that, Felice, in your introduction, that somebody might not know everything they need to know, so they may not speak up on behalf of others. Diana, hello, Diana. I'm glad you're back. It's good to see you. Fear of getting too involved. Oh my gosh, so true. Afraid to embarrass the other person. Or ourselves, right? That awkwardness. Thinking I don't know enough. Thank you, Becky. Good point. Gail said afraid of being wrong. Yes, many of us are. Absolutely. Linda says unsure of what to do. Let's see if we can get that cleared up today. Marilyn said fear of not having the right answer. Yes. And Nancy said fear. Nancy and Marilyn made it more specific. We don't have the right answer, fear of being awkward, fear of not knowing what to do. Those are spot on. Spot on. Here's a little bit of research why people don't take, and look at y'all already know. We're afraid we'll make it worse. Who said that, right? Nobody else is doing anything. That's harmless what they're doing, right? I can't make a difference. Can I? I can't make a difference. Not my problem. So those are 5 reasons. I think I put 5. Yeah. Okay. So those are legit reasons. And they kind of summarized what you said. So you're right. You're already right. We just got started. Look at that. So I'm going to share a little story with you because I like stories. They kind of help us imagine together. And so you get to sit back and relax for a couple of minutes. I'm just going to read a story like you read to your kids or grandkids. And kind of look out for the best we can do is listen. There's a point there. So one Sunday, a woman who had been literally badly beaten came into our church. Her head was misshapen. Well, my family and I attend a church that's mostly African-American congregation. And I say mostly because it's an African-American congregation, but we're there, so it's mostly. So we sometimes have a really different response to situations than other people in our church, right? And this lady really seemed to need help. And I don't know if you know about African-American church, but in African-American churches, at least my church, I met Pastor when he and I were doing the doctoral program at UMSL together. And so he's been my pastor for a number of years. And it's really funny being in his church, coming from a white church where everything is, the time is very scripted and it starts at 11 and ends at 11:59. Well, in an African-American church, or at least Pastor Sim's church, church starts at 10:30-ish, give or take, depending on kind of when the music wraps up. And I sometimes have to pack a lunch because I don't know if it's going to end at 12:31, 1:30. And I just have learned to be super flexible, kind of annoying sometimes because I'm like white and urgent and all that culture. But I've learned to roll with it. And one of the things that's unique about church, fellowship time in my white Presbyterian church was 3 minutes. You could get in about 4 or 5 handshakes and then you sit your butt back down in the chair. Well, in an African-American church, fellowship time, greeting people is 20 to 30 minutes. Mind blowing. Well, this lady became apparent to me. I saw her in the room during fellowship time. And in an African-American church, at least ours, everybody hugs on everybody. And I didn't want to hug her. I didn't want to hug her. But if I'm going to teach cultural intelligence, I just had to lean in. I gave her a hug. And she didn't smell good. Her clothes were not fresh, but she leaned on me in this hug, and I didn't let go until she was ready. And then I scrambled out of there because, like you all had said, who had said it, that you don't want to get too involved or you don't know what to do, right? My immediate reaction coming from kind of dominant white culture was to figure out what I could do to help. Well, I figured out in a moment's notice, this was my bias, this was too much, so I couldn't do any help. And so I started to leave there. I was going to go to the ladies' room. If I'm going to have to sit and listen to pastor for an hour, I better hit the head. And so I headed to the ladies' room. And it was exactly at that moment when one of the church elders, Darlene, called me over to help. She didn't call me, she signaled me. I'm 55, but she's like 65, 70, and you do what your elders tell you to do, right? And so I heeded. But I resigned. I was overwhelmed, but I went and I resigned to the idea that maybe I could learn something, especially since I train people up in cultural intelligence, right? So while another church member got this injured lady a cup of water and a protein bar, Darlene and I sat down with her, and it was kind of a pew outside the little teeny congregation sanctuary. And there in the hall, we held her, one on each side, and she started to cry, and she just cried. And eventually she started to share her story of trauma, and we just listened until she was finished. And I listened to Darlene responding, and here I teach a workshop on active listening, and here Darlene was the one doing the active listening, affirming this lady's feelings. Even though Darlene couldn't imagine, she was affirming this lady's feelings. And I was like, wow, I can do that. I can't imagine, but I can do that. And so I jumped in. I could only imagine what this lady and her children had been through over the last months. Another elder eventually came and took her to the ladies' room and had gotten some fresh clothes out of her trunk, helped the lady get changed. And so I went back to the front. This is a walk-in closet-sized church, really little church. I went back to the front pew where my family was sitting to let them know I hadn't dropped off the face of the earth, where I was and what I was doing. Just touch base with them. I turned back around, and there she was, sitting in the back pew, actually standing, fresh clothes, smile, and she was praising and singing along with the rest of the congregation. It was like she was a different person. Well, later that day, I sat back down with my family, just kind of bowled over. And I don't think I heard a word what that sermon was about. But later that day, I called Darlene to learn how she knew what to do. How was she not overwhelmed by that situation as I was? And Darlene said that, like me, she didn't know what to do either. But she did know that if we showed compassion, the lady herself would figure out the next step. Darlene helped me remember that neither she nor I were going to save her. The best we could do in that moment was deeply listen to her story with compassion. That was pause for cause for pause for me. It was my friend Darlene from a different culture who schooled me that whether, it's a friend, coworker, fellow worshiper, employee, boss, community activist, when someone is experiencing trauma or just pain, we're not going to be able to fix their challenges. We have a different job, the listening one. Before we kind of unpack that story a little bit, I just want to make sure that we've got some common vocabulary, because all cross-cultural initiatives, when you're talking across differences, we got to make sure that we're speaking kind of the same language. So this is the language from which I'm working, and I'm sure it lines up quite a bit with what you learned yesterday in your racial justice training. So what is culture? And I'll ask you just in your chat box real quick, if you could write, what word comes to mind when you see the word culture or hear the word culture? Felice says community. Anne says art. Yeah, some people think art museum or opera when they hear the word culture, or even maybe Missouri Botanical Garden. Yeah. Community group, one that it feels like belong to, says Michelle. Beautiful. Life around us. Oh, that's deep, Gail. Language, humor, unspoken norms. Since we have limited time, I'm going to keep going. Marilyn said, how we were raised. Spot on. Y'all are right. It's a set of attitudes, values, behaviors that a group of people have in common. It's as simple as that. And you're right, Diana, it's what we were taught often by our family or by our school or by our place of worship. And it's what we were taught. It is education. And culture comes in two forms, visible culture and invisible culture. And for those of us who are more visually oriented like me, I like this graphic that you can see the part that the brain loves, right? Rituals, food, laws, language. That's why we go to Little Italy in New York City or Chinatown in San Francisco, because we like ethnic things that we can see. The part we don't like is below the surface. The assumptions and the values and the norms. We can't see them, and the brain doesn't like them. We resist them. And it's usually where misunderstandings between two people or with different perspectives, it happens because of the below the surface stuff. We haven't clarified our norms. I remember do you remember, on PBS, that guy, Yale professor, African-American, Skip Gates, he asked Reverend Jesse Jackson one time, why is it that Black kids do better in athletics than in academics? And Reverend Jackson said, really, you don't know? He goes, no, I don't know. I wouldn't have asked, right? And Reverend Jackson says, well, it's because on the field and in the court, the rules are obvious, but in academics, they're not apparent. And I'm a culprit too, because, right, I started my career as a classroom teacher. When we are working with people, whether it's in a classroom setting or in a community setting, are we clarifying our norms and values from which we are working? Or are we making people guess? Well, that causes stress and the brain goes, wow, I don't like this. So all of that together, that whole iceberg is what makes our culture. And if you think about it, NCJW has its culture. Your home has its culture. A school has its culture. Well, if you think about a school, there's two types of culture, or NCJW, or a country. That there's majority culture, right? In a school, the principal sets in motion the rules and the rules and the way that culture is going to roll out. And the majority culture, it's the most widespread, powerful, and influential. But then also within school, there's classrooms, which are minority cultures. It's a distinct group. And it coexists with that dominant culture, but it's subordinate. NCJW probably has departmental differences. Certainly schools, certainly organizations, production and sales and marketing have differences, whereas the CEO is setting the larger culture in motion. And that distinct or smaller group can be because of race or nationality, gender, generation. Mind you, like it's not always numbers though, because in the state of California, the majority culture, the most powerful culture is a white culture in California, but Hispanics outnumber whites in the state. So it's not always numbers. So in the case of this church and this lady that had been hurt, I was very aware of my white skin and that this lady was Black and my fellow church members were Black. So all of subordinate minority cultures. So I was very careful to follow their lead. Just, it's not a place that I knew what I was doing, and I wanted to communicate that. And so I just followed Darlene's lead. She schools me a lot, by the way. Marilyn said, many of our committees reach out to different cultures, and we need to always work on our awareness of those cultures. And I would suggest, Marilyn, I mean, you're spot on, being aware of those cultures. And so often diversity inclusion training encourages you to be aware of the other. But I would suggest that awareness starts with cultural self-awareness. Let's go back to this. And it may be kind of a cool thing for NCJW to do is, what are our norms and values? And I actually, what I just finished before this is I'm doing a workshop series that's open to the public, and that's similar to what I did for NCJW. I'll run another one in the fall. But part of that workshop series is teaching about American dominant culture norms and values. Being aware of your own perceptions and values and norms will help you understand how you're coming across to somebody. So for example, in the case, Marilyn, to your point, in the case of my Black church, I was very aware, Marilyn, that I'm part of the dominant culture. And so I don't stand over anybody. If somebody addresses me from the pew, I'm very careful to sit down because I don't want to communicate I'm more important than you. So I would suggest self-awareness is almost as important, if not more important, than other awareness. How are you coming across to other people? And Felice says, allowing those we're trying to uplift to lead. Yeah, let them set the tone. So here are those two types of culture. And when we're talking about diversity, we're talking about the two dimensions, both visible and invisible diversity. The stuff you can see and the stuff that's not apparent. And why do we care? Because as you guys know, you ladies know more than any organization I've worked with that diversity impacts productivity and an ability to reach a potential. You all know more than anybody that our safety, health, and emotional well-being is impacted by diversity. I've never known a group that knows as well as you do that diversity impacts ability to navigate financial and legal systems. This is what you advocate for. This is why Felice said, call your representative. Level the playing field, people. So what blocks us from valuing and hearing people who are different? Well, one of the things that I do when I go into an organization is we assess your ability and the organization's ability to navigate conversations with people who are different. And like Felice and Mary too referred to, they know their stage of cultural intelligence. They know what level they are. And here are the 5 stages. The people who've taken the workshop before have know this, that there's denial, people who miss differences completely, who've grown up like in a Waterloo, Illinois, and have never known anybody but white working class people. It's not malicious, they just don't know, not much exposure. Whereas people in polarization are very aware of differences, but are judgmental of them. And they've decided if they're good or bad or right or wrong. Only about 15% of the population are in polarization. We think we're really polarized in our society, but this is what we really do to each other. And this is what hurts and pushes people into polarization. When we downplay our differences, our uniqueness, and we can't see people for their uniqueness, it hurts. What's lovely about the stage of minimization is we see each other's common humanity, that we want the best for our kids, for example. That's what minimization does well, that polarization doesn't know how to do. The multicultural mindsets are acceptance, and this is really where things kind of begin to turn, acceptance and adaptation. Somebody who's in acceptance is not downplaying differences anymore, but curious about differences and adapting their behavior to show respect across those differences. Kind of like me needing to sit down in the pew or sit down with the woman and follow Darlene's lead. I was adapting my behavior to show respect in that situation because I didn't know what to do. And so I was accepting the situation as it was, not downplaying it. Although if you noticed, I tried to get out and go to the bathroom really fast. I tried to minimize it, right? But no, Darlene was like, come on back. You're gonna do this thing that you do. She always does that. So because this is what we do to each other, 2/3 of the population that take the IDI show up in minimization. And I'm talking about around the world. The Intercultural Development Inventory has been back translated into 11 languages. So the data set is really big at this point. They've been at it for about 2 decades, and 66.8% of the people minimize, which means we focus on what we have in common, but that assumes everyone is like us, and it pressures people into assimilation and dismisses differences. Makes people inadvertently feel invisible. So in your chat box, just think about kind of those, how does minimization impact the people in your sphere? Michelle is asking, does false equivalency fall into this? That's a vocabulary word I don't know, Michelle. Do you want to just speak up and tell me what that means?
Yes, if you can hear me okay. That's when somebody like, in the Jewish community would say, oh, well, I understand what, your, African-American community went through because our people went through the Holocaust, or our people went through this, so we know what you feel. So that's a false equivalency.
So Michelle, you've nailed it, because when you're what's the impact when somebody does that? I'll ask you, Michelle. When somebody says, oh, that's just like my experience, what is the impact of that?
Well, it's talking about yourself and not actually paying attention to the person who has a pain or a history or a need. You're putting yourself still on top of the conversation. Bingo.
You just gave the best example of minimization. You've turned the conversation back to you, and you've inadvertently, not intentionally, but it happens, and you've made that person feel invisible because you've dismissed their experience. And not that the Holocaust isn't horrific, not that your experience generationally isn't something we never ever need to have happen again. But right now, when somebody's sharing their pain for you, are we dismissing it by doing this false equivalency? Michelle, thank you for my new vocabulary word. Linda says people may mistakenly feel they are being good when they say, I don't see you as Black, I see you as a person, but they're missing the big part of who the person is. That's a perfect example. When somebody says, I don't see color, you're basically saying, I don't see your experience. It's kind of like me saying, I don't see your womanhood. Excuse me. A lot of who you are is because of your womanhood, right? So it's actually a really kind of cruel thing to say. I don't see your lived experience. Yesterday, I called a friend of mine. She has 4 African-American children, I think 12 to 25. And I said, I just called her to say, I just heard, I heard what happened in the news. Yet again, another murder. What's going on? How you doing? And damn, if I didn't get an earful from her. I couldn't pull that false equivalency stuff. First of all, because I can't imagine. But she said, Amy, it's like we're hunted. People, the police prey upon us. I can't imagine. But even in that case, I listened to her for a half an hour before I opened my mouth. I mean, all I said was, God, I get it. Damn, that must be hard. I can only imagine. Just little sentences. to affirm her experience. Any other things that come to mind as minimization happening? Or if you have a question like, is this minimization? Nancy says, Amy Hunter, the talk. Oh, Nancy, you're talking about the talk that African-American parents have with their children about how to deal with police? Yes, that's a cultural difference. I've certainly not had to have that conversation with Christopher, my son, but I've had it, but I didn't have to. Jen says it happens with illness too. Can you elaborate? Can you unmute yourself and just tell me what that means, Jen?
Sure. You know, people, and I do think people mean well when they're saying it, but my husband is a colon cancer survivor. And when he was being treated, when he was going through chemo, we had an insurance adjuster come to our house to, I don't know, for work we were doing. And he said, "Oh, I know what you're going through. My wife just had back surgery." So, you know, I think he was trying to be helpful, but I think sometimes people do that a lot because it makes them feel a little more comfortable after, you know, around someone who's going through something difficult.
Jen, you nailed it. There is a good intention there to try to connect with the person. But when you've got so many people in our society practicing minimization, they're not aware of the impact of their words, right? He had no idea. Back surgery and cancer are not the same thing. And he inadvertently downplayed and diminished your experience. If he'd said, that's just got to be so tough. That's all he needed to say. Something closer to that kept the focus on you. Is that about right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So what I'm talking about is decentering a conversation. And believe me, it takes the workshops that I do, it takes all 5 workshops for many people to get to the point to be able to center a conversation on someone else, particularly when you identify with the dominant culture. You're accustomed to talking about you to relate, but it's actually really off-putting for people. If you'd like, Felice, I can share, or if Jen, if you'll share with me the emails of the people on the call, I can share with you a blog about how to decenter a conversation and keep it focused on the other person. Marilyn says, like saying, I know how you feel when you really don't. Yep, that's exactly what Jen was saying. Sometimes I'll respond with, I can only imagine, but not, I know how you feel. Just if you can say, if you can use you, that must be tough on you. That's so hard. Use you instead of I when you're empathizing. So if not minimization, then what? We've already started to allude to it. What your goal here is creating belonging, that you both belong in this conversation. Yes, even when there's political differences, we feel like we need to make a point and we need to be right, especially in a dominant culture like the United States that's, there's either you win or you're not winning. Not when you're decentering the conversation. It's about them. Let them win. It's not about whether you're right. It's about the relationship. Is what I'm saying right now going to continue and deepen our relationship? Is the person going to feel valued, heard, and engaged? When we used to hug in the olden days, a hug is often better than words. Yeah. So if you're not comfortable holding somebody physically, hold space for them instead. That must be so hard. Make sure the other person feels valued. So what if we see someone making another person feel like they don't belong, that they don't feel valued? So self-awareness is really important. And you can simply check, learn how to check how you're coming across. How did my words come across you? Did my words offend you? Because that plants seeds for negativity. Just how did my words come across? What was the impact of my words? I say that all the time to my husband. And about 90% of the time I'm okay. But dang, about 10% of the time that I say, can I do a do-over on that? Unfortunately, he loves me enough to give me a do-over. So what about the other guy, this advocacy thing? We're going to stop. So when we're not sure how to respond in a situation with the uncle at Thanksgiving dinner, or when somebody's putting you on the spot, what do? You stop, slow down, take a breath, observe your reaction, self-awareness
Oh my
again,
God.
and feeling of others. Check that you're safe. And if
This
everything's
is like really like old stuff, Dan.
proceed with curiosity and wonder. Yeah, Jen, you said not a lot of people don't like hugs all that much. Absolutely. Yeah, in my African-American church, people hug, but I don't find that true in white society, white culture as much. And you have to ask, especially when you're working across gender. Absolutely. Proceeding with curiosity and wonder. So what we're doing is compassion for someone's context and taking action. This is cultural intelligence, an equation for it. So keeping this compassion for someone's context, how do we advocate for another, right? Well, here's the 5 Ds: distract, delegate, delay, direct, document. And let's break this down a little bit. So when you're in a situation and somebody needs, think in terms of bullying, a bullying situation, right? Or if we think, I'm just thinking about which of the 5 Ds I used with Darlene in that case. It wasn't distract, but if you're in a situation where you are if you're safe, you can de-escalate the situation, start a conversation with the person who's being targeted in the bullying. You could say, for example, on the subway, do you know what the next stop is? Sorry. Can you all put in your chat box some other ways that you could distract in a situation at a dinner table, in a community center? How might you distract to kind of break up the conversation a little bit that's not productive for the target? Could you put in your, it's a small group, you can say it out loud or put it in the chat box. Yeah, Diana says, ask a question about another topic, change the subject. Another thing we can do is delegate, find someone in a position of authority and ask them for help, right? This person's being harassed, can you help them out? Whether that's a teacher or a police officer, or maybe it's somebody who's on the bus driver, somebody who's in a position of authority. You would ask them to get involved. And you can always ask the target if you'd like them to call the police. Thank you, Jen, for pointing it out. Do you want to ask about a police officer? And cultural intelligence always depends on the context, right? Compassion plus context plus action. So you're right. If you're seeing somebody being bullied, the police officer may not be it. That's why you're there, to assess the situation. What's the best?
Well, I also meant in terms of, with racial bias and situations where it might put someone in greater danger to get a police officer involved.
You're right. Who else might you be able to get involved? If you see a kid being harassed, it might be a parent, right? It might be another adult that the kids know. Can you think of, let me get through all 5 of these, and I'm going to ask you to think about a specific situation that we could answer together. There's, so there's distract, there's delegate, there's delay. After the situation, so if it's not a safe situation for you to get involved, right? If you've stopped and you're not safe, after the situation is over, check in with the person who was harassed, the target. And you can ask, are you okay? Can I accompany you somewhere? What do you need? So in this case, this is a little bit of what Darlene and I were doing, being with her. We weren't delaying in the case, but figuring out what she needed. Just little bits. There's direct. Check your safety first. Speak up, be firm and clear, and name it. That's inappropriate. Leave them alone. And as a woman, we have to, again, think about our own context. And document. This is important. Keep a safe distance. Make sure anything you do is focused on supporting the target. Record date, time, and landmarks. Ask the target what they want you to do with that footage. It's not for social media. I actually wrote a blog about a woman who put something on social media that she never asked. She was using it to make a point. That's not kind. It's not compassion. Ask the target. Oh, this is a sidebar. If you want to learn more specifically, because it's pretty hard to cover this stuff in 45 minutes, you can take the IDI and learn your stage of cultural development, develop that self-awareness that Felice had referred to. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I post almost every day some story or an action you can take. You can read my blog. Felice even referred to that. I write a blog once a month, and you can join my workshop series come August. So here's where we can apply. Of the 5 ways to be a bystander, maybe flip over your sheet of paper and write 3 ways that you remember to be a bystander. 2 feelings you have kind of right now in response to this. And 1 way this applies to NCJW. I'd be really honored if you would send me an email with your 3, 2, 1. Here's my email address, Amy@Empowering Partners. But I'm going to stop sharing now, and I would like to ask you how this information applies at NCJW and your advocacy work. And then we're going to wrap up with a 1-word summary. But first, how does this apply for you?
Not centering ourselves in an issue where perhaps it's not our not necessarily not our wheelhouse, but we not trying to take the lead of, when we're down in Jeff City and we're not the lead organization.
Okay. And are you talking, Jen, in this case, coming alongside and saying, how can we support you in your effort here?
Exactly.
Beautiful. Yeah. And that, Jen, sounds exactly, all of you can unmute, please, unless you've got a lot of background noise, please feel free to unmute. But Jen, what you're talking about is compassion plus context plus action. It's not centered on me and I need to feel good and I need to make it better for this person or save the day. It's just, how is it that you need in this white lady's support, right? What can I do with my context within my parameters to help you? That's beautiful.
Yeah, and if I can kind of piggyback on that, I guess I'm interpreting that some about what role do we play in a particular effort or project or social service. Is it a support role, lead role? Are we financing? What are we doing? That kind of thing. I don't know if that's the same thing Jen was referencing or something different, but.
Are you talking, Mary, about finding out?
Not assuming.
Yeah.
It's
not assuming.
yeah, kind of checking in, are we here in this partnership or in this effort to learn, to speak, to share experience, to fund, what's the verb? But I think that's probably part of cultural intelligence, is understanding the partnerships. And I use the term role. There's lots of, terms for it, but I think that's an important aspect of what we do. It seems to be. And
You just said, Mary, that you think that's part of cultural intelligence. It is cultural intelligence. When you're minimizing, you're assuming you know your role. But when
yeah.
we move into acceptance and adaptation, then we're going, I wonder what the best way it is to support here. And maybe you find out for one person, or maybe you find out from 3 or 4, and then kind of summarize, this is what I'm thinking, and reshare it. But yeah, you drop the assumptions and you go find out. If we're not gonna minimize, we stop assuming.
Yeah. And we ask the question. We say, how can we help? Kind of thing.
Yeah. And sometimes people don't have an answer to that question, and maybe we just have to sit back and observe for a little while and notice a spot where you in particular would be a really good fit. And then you would say, I'm perceiving this as a place that I could help. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Still asking permission to enter in.
Mm-hmm.
There's it is, compassion plus context plus action. There you did it. So Jen and Mary have nailed it already. Yeah.
No, like the other day I was at a meeting where there's a group of us that is trying to give support to some women who are like childcare entrepreneurs. And there's a great racial educational divide between, the groups. And it's been so interesting, and I've learned so much about navigating these intercultural conversations.
Like, will you tell me what you learned?
How to approach who, and where we may think, okay, we go in, we have a timeline, we do this, we do that. Let me tell you how to do this, as opposed to, oh, you don't want to come across as too, I'm actually these women are coaching me on how to approach conversations with in a different way that I have not experienced in the past.
What have you learned? Can you give me an example?
Well, instead of coming in with a timeline, let's what's our issue and prioritizing, and maybe we could come down with a timeline. It's like, they were talking about someone who wasn't actually there, and one of the other women who's a childcare entrepreneur is like, well, I think we need to have someone who really has a personal relationship first contact this person and figure out what's going on. And it was just a much more business-like, softer, personal approach, not appearing too heavy-handed or overwhelming, it was just like a really different approach. And I was just like listening to the conversation. I was glad I didn't open my mouth.
Nice.
It wasn't what was going on in my head. I and I'm glad I kept it in my head, and I listened and let this other person speak before me.
That's some kind of wise, and that's definitely cultural intelligence. If you let the other person go first, you'll kind of find what educators call a person's growing edge. What it is that's important for them is the place to start. When you're coming from the dominant culture, finding their growing edge, that sweet spot of what's their issue, what's their question, what's their struggle. I love that you knew, and that's why I started out with this story about that. Darlene reminded me that really the best we can do is to listen first. And it doesn't mean minimizing you. all it means is putting them first, because when you get to acceptance and adaptation, you're very aware of who you are and what you bring to the table. You're just listening first so that you can pair it up. So we want to honor them by hearing them, and you've already done your own awareness of what you bring. Because I remember you're a financial guru, right, Felice?
Well,
Yeah. So financial
Yeah, but-
literacy, you have forgotten more than I'll ever know about financial literacy. So you bring this strength to the conversation, and you could railroad in, but that might not be what somebody needs at this moment, but they certainly need it. Maybe right now they just need a protein bar. And maybe in a week, now that they trust you because you gave them a protein bar, maybe they'll be able to hear you that a savings account is a legit thing to have, or whatever. That's, I mean, what you're doing, Felice, is awesome. It's compassion for their context, not yours yet. Yours will come.
I think it's being an ally and not necessarily a savior. Am I making sense?
You're making great sense. That's exactly what Felice is describing. She has her expertise and she'll bring it to bear when it's needed,
Right,
but an ally listens first.
right,
That's beautiful. Or an advocate or a bystander. Yeah, they listen
right,
first.
right, right. Because I think sometimes we have a rescue ranger mentality. Gotta do this, and then it'll be stopped.
It's ultimately why I had to leave my white Presbyterian church. They kept sending missions trips to abroad. And I'm like, hey, there's people downtown. What? And nobody would listen to me. So I went to a black church where we can be together.
You know, if I could ask or make an observation, just trying to share something that's just twirling around in my brain right now. I'm trying to think of ways that we can use what we've learned from you, Amy, in our advocacy work, like when we speak with our legislators. And we've used stories a lot, but as I'm putting together a lot of what we've talked about today, I'm almost wondering if when we call to talk to our legislators, instead of saying, this is why I would like you to support or to not support this particular bill, maybe part of it is asking, what are you invested in? Tell us the reasons that you think this bill should pass. And then maybe we can look at it more from their perspective and say, yes, and here's where I'm coming from on that point. And I've never done that before. Jen, I mean, you've done a whole lot more of this advocacy work than I have, and maybe a lot of you have. And I'm just wondering if coming at it from a different perspective might help us in our efforts.
Diana, what you're describing is cultural intelligence, meaning that even the people in power, even though you're in a subordinate position, in a sense, in that scenario, meeting them where they are. What are you interested in? What are you invested in? And you're applying it. You're decentering the conversation and making it about them, because I'll tell you guys, y'all, a secret. When you hear somebody out, they'll be able to hear you. It doesn't go the other way. When you take it, when you take an interest, but when you listen deeply, when somebody feels valued, heard, and engaged, and you don't swoop in with a solution or, oh, I've had that experience, like Jen was describing. Mm-hmm. But what are you invested? I love that word. What are you invested in? Find out their story and then find the connection. And this, Diana, what you described is acceptance and adaptation, appreciating that even if you can't stand this legislator, finding out what they're invested in so that you can tag on what you're going to bring. That's cultural intelligence. Y'all are extraordinary to work with. You just pick it up so fast.
Well, for myself, I can say that a few years ago, I didn't know anything about any of this. So I have had wonderful teachers at NCJW to put a lot of these thoughts into our minds. And we have gone into legislators we've had meetings and said, you know, what are you working on that we can help you with? But personally, I don't think I've ever said to a legislator, why are you so invested in this particular bill? What is it that you think is so great about it? And maybe others in our group have, but I just have not really thought that way before. So
May I
Just-
make a suggestion with what you just said, Diana?
Hmm?
Be careful, and I'll tell all y'all, the word why is kind of like a hot burner on a stove. Don't touch it.
yeah,
Right.
I know better than that.
But for the rest of the group, I don't know if you heard me say that in the workshop series, don't ask people why, because it makes people automatically defensive. But if you say, what are you, can you tell me what you're invested in, or what are you invested, what are you working on?
Mhm.
I don't want to add, and you actually could say, I don't want to add burden to you. I want to compliment what you're doing, but I don't know what you're doing. Can you school me? Can you tell me? That's a beautiful approach, Diana. Diana, I may be calling you. There's a blog there.
So Amy, something like, can you tell me what about the bill is so important to you? Would that be?
Yeah.
That's
If
defensive.
I think that would come with a tone. What's
Okay.
so important to, I could just hear one of my teenagers saying, I don't understand what's so important about that. Like, I really don't give a shit about you, is the way they kind of come. Sometimes they come at me and I'm like, you want to say that so I feel like talking to you? And then they'll go, oh, because they have no idea. They're not self-aware at all. They'll have no idea what their tone was. And they'll go, oh, what about mom? What's so important about that? So I think at least it's just how.
Oh, this has been really terrific, and boy, I'd love to go on, and I think other people would too, but we are 5 minutes past the hour, and I want to.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
This has been great.
No, this is what's so great about it, is we're enjoying it so much that, you know, no one's watching the clock, but we have to. So I want to thank Dr. Narishkin very much. Amy, this has been really terrific. And I want to encourage people to go to empoweringpartners.com and look at her blog, because she really gives great tips in her blog. And I think there's so much that we can always continue to learn from you. So thank you.
Elise, I gotta just say out loud, I only can write a blog once a month because there's a lot of prayer, like Diana just said something really cool. And now I want to think on that. And then I'll like think, noodle, pray, get awakened in the middle of the night. And like the universe says, no, you gotta write this. And so thank you for saying that out loud, that they're helpful.
They are. And so I'm going to look at the blog to get some good suggestions on how to make this approach.
All right, Diana, we might be talking.
Okay, anytime, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Oh, and everyone, a survey will be sent, an evaluation form, and please don't forget, it helps us with future programming if you can complete it. Thank you.
And I will have Amy's email on that survey as well. So, and Amy, I will be sending you the email of the attendees as well,
Oh, cool. All right.
if that's okay with everyone.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, I'll send y'all a blog. Thank
Great.
you. Appreciate you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
Thank you.
Take
Great to
care.
see you all.